Greetings once again to each and all. This is John Lash recording the Newsflash number 6 on the 26th of February 2015. And the title of this Newsflash is The Story of Life Describing Itself. I'll start out with a little bit of celestial intel, harking back to the heady and salty days of the Gaia navigation experiment. I reckon that today is the 8th day, that's a Fibonacci series number, of the Matangi shift of 2015. But as some of you may have observed, the calling of this shift last week was an extremely delicate matter. As the moment came, that is to say, as the new moon event occurred on the 18th of February, marking the last day of the preceding Kali cycle, there was a moment of suspense in anticipation of the sunset crescent. Intuitively, I myself felt at that time that it would be a Matangi shift. But the odds of the moon gliding through the composite stars of the Manitou, which correlates to Matangi, and appearing at sunset in the stars of the fishes, which corresponds to Swan Deva, were pretty high. So there was a slim chance that the moon would signal a Matangi shift. Somehow I felt this would occur, even though I might not be able to observe it from my vantage point. But as a matter of fact, on the evening of the 20th, when I looked out, I knew that the moon was there. I couldn't see it, but I knew that it was there, and I knew that it was still in the Manitou. And then I got a message from a faithful observer and veteran of the GNE, Fletch, who told me that he had made the observation of an extremely thin crescent that would have been in the constellation of the Manitou, and hence the shift was named for Matangi. At the same time, all the world was observing a brilliant celestial spectacle in the evening sky. Some photographs were sent. Passive voice. I received some photographs from a couple of people showing the crescent moon, which had by then passed into the fishes in close proximity to the Venus-Mars conjunction in the fishes. So, what does a veteran skywatcher have to say about such events? Well, sometimes the shading of a Dakini shift is extremely subtle, and often there can be an association or merge of two different frequencies. I would say that is the case for the current shift. So I give the shift to Matangi, who leads the planetary vision quest, but I also attribute to the shift a strong overtone of Swan Deva. That would be the Diamond Sky Dakini, who oversees and guards, and to a certain extent guides, the great planetary narratives, including the narrative of the fallen goddess scenario itself. So what I'm feeling now on the 8th day is a strong confirmation that both of these Shakti powers are operating through this shift. I would say Matangi basically with a higher octave resonance of Swan Deva. Well, why do I say that? Well, as you know, reception to these frequencies is largely a matter of intuition. The Dakini shifts are phases in the emotional frequencies of the earth. They are phases of her emotional weather system, you could say. And when you track the planetary animal mother through the methodology of planetary tantra, you become skilled, you become sensitive to these frequencies. And you read them in your own life, you read them in the events of your own life, the inner events of your psyche, the outer events of your situation, and you read them sometimes, off and on, erratically, in the events unfolding in the collective drama of the human species. I have to reiterate what I've said since the completion of reset, namely, that the Dakini shifts don't play out in the same way that they did during reset. Consequently, they need to be treated in a different manner. So when I say that I sense a confirmation of the Matangi frequency blended with Swandeva at the 8th day of this shift, I mean that I see in my life, in the events of my life, the concrete reflection of the issues, themes, teachings, and topics of those two particular Shakti powers. Now that we're in correction, the way that you live through a Dakini shift is less a process of instruction and anticipation, and more a process of existential engagement. To put it in plain English, I would say that the reflections of the shifts now become palpable and concrete in the events of your life. That change is due, in part, to the fact that if you are living in correction, then you must be contributing to correction. You cannot live in correction as a spectator, can you? And so, to speak in the first person, when I ask myself, how's it going with my attunement to the current Dakini shift, I don't just speculate in my mind about what the answer is. I don't look for lessons, and I don't wait to be shown how it's operating. I act, and by my own actions, I demonstrate how it's operating. You see? This is the difference in following the Dakini shifts in correction, by contrast to the way that it was done during reset. So you can ask yourself each month, what are the opportunities in your life to demonstrate in concrete ways and in specific events and actions and incentives and undertakings the operative themes of that shift. So I find right now, during the week that has transpired since February 19th, which was the first day of the new shift, well, I find myself intensely engaged in certain issues that reflect both Matangi and Swandeva. What are these issues? Well, they are the subject of this particular newsflash. And they are, namely, to give you the proper setup, the Planetary Vision Quest and the Fallen Goddess Scenario. The Planetary Vision Quest comes under the guidance and guardianship of Matangi. That is her unique role. She oversees the Planetary Vision Quest, whatever that might be. And, of course, the Fallen Goddess Scenario, the sacred narrative of the Aeons of Fire that was the centerpiece of the pagan Gnostic mysteries, is the supreme narrative on this planet. And it is the story of the planet. And I would also call it the story of life describing itself. It's the first time I've used that particular phrase, but I like the way it sounds. What do you think? Of course, Swandeva oversees all the great, sweeping, comprehensive, and orchestral narratives that comprise the weave of historical plots and patterns and events. And, of course, the context and framing story for all those stories is the story of the earth itself. So I have to say that I'm shaken, not stirred, like a James Bond cocktail. And I'm pretty, what shall I say? Well, I'm stunned by some things that have happened in this week since the 19th of February. Really, really stunned. I can sense that the force of correction is coming through the events in the world, and it's coming through in my own life, in the events of my own life. I can sense it coming through. I can sense correction. You might say, getting some tread. It's getting some tread on the road. And just recently, just today, in fact, on the 8th day, which is generally the day when the motifs and themes of a Dakini shift come into definition, conceptually speaking, that there has been a remarkable breakthrough in difficulties that I've faced over many years. This breakthrough concerns how to present the fallen goddess scenario to the public at large, and how to get out that story so that it can reach young people under 12, adolescents of the age of 12 and older, and so that it can reach the entire adult public on the planet. At the beginning of the shift, I also paid close attention to what is happening with the planet Jupiter right now. You know, you can see Jupiter in the evening sky. Jupiter is still in its retrograde phase, and it has shifted back into the crab, actually. It was in the lion. It has shifted back into the crab, and it will be in the crab for about 2 months before it then reemerges from the composite stars of the crab and shifts into the lion and makes a brilliant conjunction with Regulus, the heart star in the lion. That star may also be called Virya, or it may be called Valor, meaning valor, which is an heroic trait that can belong to both men and women. Now remember that Jupiter is the terma. So for some time now, the terma has been standing before the lion. Jupiter stands before the lion. This is the mythopoetic syntax for the actual astronomical event underway. Jupiter stands before the lion, then it drops back into the crab for 2 months, and then advances again through the lion for the remainder of 2015. Now, how would you read this celestial omen? Remember that Jupiter is the terma, and the terma is the guru. At the conclusion of Kali Yuga, in the last 11 minutes of the Kalpa, in the last 200 years before the turnover of the Kalpa, the terma is the guru. The fact that the terma of Gaia Awakening is the guru for humanity completely blows away all messianic expectations of any kind of, quote, world teacher, unquote, to use a quaint old term from the Bailey Blavatsky gang. There is no world teacher. There is no Messiah. The messianic expectation of the ages is a toxic pathological syndrome. But there is a guru. That is not a human guru, but it is a planetary guru, because the terma of Gaia awakening is a message from the planet itself to the human species. And so the terma develops in the endopsyche of humanity, and it develops in the lives and hearts and minds and feelings of those who follow planetary Tantra, as reflected in the positions of Jupiter. Hence, the development of the terma, while Jupiter is in the crab, can be traced in certain activities, and the development of the terma as Jupiter passes through the lion for the larger part of 2015 can be determined by other activities. The character of those activities in both cases is something you come to learn from the associations of those constellations. The crab is associated with Tantra Mother. The lion is associated with Bhairavi, or Balam, or Sekhmet, a ferocious warrior aspect of Kali's rage, of Gaia's rage. So, you may recall the TVM, or the Treasure Valley Mysterium. You may recall that coming out of Reset, I proposed a visualization. There was a snippet of film, like microfilm that a spy might carry around, concealed on his or her body. And on that snippet of microfilm was an image of a chiral DNA chemical formula. And I said, by visualizing that formula and holding the visualization in the human mind, you were collaborating with the Aeon Sophia to produce its manifestation, to produce the rebirth and recreation of a network, a mycelium network of mystery schools across this planet. Well, that was just an exercise that I proposed during the time that Jupiter was in the crab, because that exercise is compatible with the meaning of the crab, you see, with the meaning of that constellation, particularly with supersaturation. Now, I have to say that during this unique 2-month period, which just began last week, when Jupiter drops back into the crab, you can expect there to be a kind of refresher course and a review of everything that you know coming from Tantra Mother. So Jupiter is dropping back into the crab, and you can expect a reactivation of the lessons and instructions typical of Tantra Mother, namely, release from pretending. Oh, don't I wish, don't I wish. Release from pretending. And supersaturation. And the 5 skull crown initiation concerning how to transform the 5 poisons, including envy, into Dakini elixirs. You may recall that those are 3 of 5 themes to be associated with Tantra Mother. The other 2 are match and merge, the technique of match and merge, and certain Kalika sexual practices. So you can expect a crash course as we go back and review these. And you can also expect, I think, to see in the world at large that the masks of deception are falling away. They are falling away at an astonishing rate, considering how long it takes human beings to change and how stubborn human programming and human brainwashing can be. I think it's pretty clear now, if you look back and compare this moment to 9/11, that a good many people on this planet are awake to the lies and deceptions of the war games and the mind games about war and the mind games about the Jews and the Muslims that are being perpetrated constantly on the planet. Those are games of pretending, of games of malevolent and pernicious make-believe. And the masks by which those games are upheld are falling apart. I saw an amazing clip on the last Trends report of Joe Salente, where he shows some shots of the President of the United States giving a speech and lying incessantly and flagrantly. And there is one moment when that gruesome creature makes a remark that you see clearly that he pushes his tongue into his cheek, into his right cheek, and pushes it around and rolls around the end of his tongue in his right cheek as he's making this statement of total falsity. So this is a pretty remarkable thing to say. It's a granular detail of current events, but it shows me that the masks are falling away and the release from pretending to be identified with Tantra Mother may now be sweeping massively across the planet. And you can bet it's going to sweep massively through your personal and private life as well. And I would call it a massive shakedown of emotional and psychological blackmailing and pretense over the next 2 months. So be prepared to be released from pretending. On the other hand, I would offer my own case in demonstration of Tantra Mother's principle of supersaturation. Remember that she requires a visualization act by the human animal for her supersaturation to produce change in the world. Supersaturation occurs at a particular state of chemical lability in which something is dropped into the chemical mix at that moment, causing, for instance, the crystallization of sugar. So it is the role of the human animal and the responsibility of the human animal to drop that catalytic element into the supersaturation prepared by the planetary animal mother. Initially, I proposed the visualization of the DNA chiral chemical structure. That still holds. That has been deposited in her supersaturated atmosphere, which is, by the way, the compressed ionosphere, and by extension, the compressed lower atmosphere. And in proof of that, you see, and you will continue to see, that it's going to get a lot colder. The life ether is cold. The life ether, it's a term from anthroposophical biophysics, you could say. So, I propose now, if you would follow me and support me in the coming 2 months, in another act to catalyze the supersaturation of the planet. I am taking the cue for this act from the Matangi shift in its merge with the Swandeva shift. What precisely am I talking about? A screenplay based on the Fallen Goddess scenario. Actually, I started writing this screenplay 2 years ago in August. And I have the opening 25 or 30 minutes, which is 25 or 30 pages of a typical script. It's my intention in the next 2 months, by the time that Jupiter returns into the composite stars of the Lion, to have completed the first 82-page or 82-minute full-length screenplay version of the Fallen Goddess scenario. And I would be most grateful for your support in reaching that goal. Now, with the written notes, I'll give you an outline of what I'm doing and how the screenplay looks and how it is intended to work. Also, in the written notes, you'll find that I have listed 9 different versions of the Fallen Goddess scenario. 9 different ways of presenting it, representing it, adapting it. The first way is obviously the way that it has been brought forth to the world by the reconstruction achieved by yours truly. We'll call that the standard study version. The standard study version of the Fallen Goddess scenario can be found on metahistory.org, and of course it can be found in Not in His Image. And that is the 9-episode version. That is version 1, but there are 8 other versions, and you can read what they are. Something that I've been experiencing lately, well, let me put it this way. I think it would be stating the obvious to say that what I handle every day is far too much for one person to handle. And it gets to me at moments. Sometimes I just go under. The complexity and density of what I'm handling, of what I'm developing, if you will, in the teachings that stem from the Terma is staggering, and I can barely stand it at moments. Sometimes I feel like I'm just going to drop flat on my face. The physical intensity of it is considerable. Now the time has come for something to change in this respect. And although I'm never comfortable in calling for collaboration or anything of that sort, let me say that I call upon your utmost complicity to support this particular initiative. Let's focus on this. I know it's hard to focus with me, folks. You know, there are so many things floating around in the life work of John Lash, aren't there? There's Celestics, there's Starbase, there's the Planetary Vision Quest, there's Gaian Alchemy, there's the Telestic Shamanism, Instruction by the Light, there's the Rituals of Courting, there's the whole Calico War Party, there's who knows what. I can't even remember it myself. I have said before, and I'll say it again, and hear me with all the compassion that you can draw out of your bones. The very abundance of this terma is its disadvantage. The very abundance of it works to its disadvantage. It is encumbered by its own abundance. So what I've decided to do is announce to you in this talk that I'm going to focus on the story of life describing itself. That is the Fallen Goddess scenario. Don't you like that term? And that's how the screenplay begins, about life describing itself, life witnessing itself. And so I'm announcing to you that now we have a focus. Let's focus on this, okay? I'll focus on it, even though I cannot turn away from other urgent developing activities, such as the continuation of Celestics, or hey, the Calico War Party needs a little bit of guidance here and there. It needs a nudge or two. I cannot turn away from these things. I cannot tell you what it is like to have my responsibilities. Now that may sound like a self-important statement, but I'm just putting out the facts of the situation, and I'm laying my cards on the table. So I would be greatly encouraged if you would focus your mind with me over the next 2 months on this one particular project. I do explain in the written notes here how the writing of the screenplay which is underway, ought to go along or parallel another event, which would be the preparation, whatever preparation is required, to do a Kickstarter campaign to get the funds in order to make this screenplay into a full-length film. As you concentrate on manifesting the fallen goddess scenario in the exopsyche of the human species, that is to say, in the realm of conscious public discourse. The exopsyche is the realm of things that are actually spoken. The endopsyche, things are not spoken. They are only suggested or dreamed. It is the realm of the second attention. But the realm of the first attention is where things are said, things are spoken. So this is where the event happens, bringing and birthing the fallen goddess scenario into the mind of humanity in the year 2015. Needless to say, it requires some effort in teamwork and networking and coordination to proceed with this project. I can write the screenplay myself. I'll happily keep you informed on how it's going along and maybe give you a little sneak preview of it now and then. As far as setting up a Kickstarter campaign is concerned, I have absolutely no idea how to do that. And so that's where the teamwork and networking comes in. And if any of you would like to participate, you need to go to gaiaspora.org and click on the section entitled G&E Transcription Project. Now, some of you may not know that this section of gaiaspora.org even exists. In fact, I have to confess that I frequently forget that this section of gaiaspora.org even exists. Can you believe that? And it is a massive part of the site, and it is a massive creation. But I didn't do it. It was done for me by my loyal and brilliant tech assistant, Mario from Croatia. Now, if you look at the G&E Transcription Project, you will see what that is, and you will see that the purpose of that project is to transcribe into text the 118 navigator briefings of the G&E so that they can eventually be published as a set of bound volumes. And the record of the G&E will then be passed over as a legacy to generations to come. And you can see how Mario has set it up in order to monitor these transcriptions, those that are done, those that are in progress, those that need to be done. But you will also note on that page, if you scroll down, it says, please contact us. Simon, who helped me do the entire G&E and who uploaded the talks for me, and Mario, contact them on logs@gaiaspora.org in order to register your interest. Well, I bring that email address to your attention. That email address now becomes the access point for all future teamwork and networking activity deriving from my work. So there will be in addition to the GNE transcription project, which is also underway, a Kickstarter project. And that will be on gaiaspora.org. And that Kickstarter project is there for anyone to look at and anyone to join. And the way that you get in on that project is to write to that address, logs, LOGS, at gaiaspora.org. You know, teamwork is a big thing for me. My teamwork so far, until about August of last year, actually, May of last year, May of 2014, right after Reset ended, teamwork began with a visit of Stephanie from Santa Fe in order to launch Celestics. And then Mario appeared and set up this project and also set up all of my websites and YouTube platforms. Today I can happily report that teams are forming around my work, and it's no longer just the Turton and his two cats who are carrying forward the core message of planetary Tantra. Also bear in mind that in addition to the abundance of the terma itself, there are other aspects of my work, namely Celestics, that appeared before the terma. Of course, Celestics is profoundly related to certain aspects of the terma and to the star intel of the Gaia navigation experience, but on a whole, that was independent of the terma, and yet that also needs to be implemented through teamwork. So all of that is gradually coming into form now, I'm happy to say. I myself can't set up these teams, but once they're set up, I can oversee them and I can direct them. Right now, it's beginning to look like 2015 will be an excellent year for the formation of these teams and passage of command. So with that said, I'd like to come around now to the topic of the story of life describing itself, which is the title of this news briefing. To lead into this topic, I'll cite a few lines of song from the genre of flamenco. You know, I live a good part of the time in the land of flamenco, which is Andalusia. If you really want to know about flamenco, you should read the essay on the Duende by Federico Garcia Lorca. Now, it's a funny thing about flamenco, with that it's globally recognized as a signature of the country of Spain, and of course nobody can change that. That's an indelible fact. But as a matter of fact, as I understand it, flamenco is not necessarily popular to the great mass of Spanish people, you know? And as a matter of fact, it doesn't come from Spaniards, it comes from Gitanos, from gypsies. And these gypsies are not Spanish, even though they may be Spanish gypsies. Their origins are not Spanish. Their origins are Eastern. And I was told once by somebody who was an expert on flamenco music and dance that there's a term in Spanish, I don't know what it is, but it translates as the gripe or the complaint. And this is what some Spanish people call flamenco, because it sounds like a gripe. It sounds like somebody complaining. And it often is. It often is. And it just so happened that a few days ago, a certain flamenco song came to my mind, when it's not exactly a complaint, but it's more or less of a lament. Many flamenco songs are laments. And the words of this song in English, the English equivalent, go something like this. If anybody thinks that they are great, or they are somehow superior, they need superior to the world, or superior in the world, they need to go to the cemetery. And there, in the cemetery, they will see what the world is. and it is just a handful of dirt. So this is very typical kind of sentiment that you find in some of these flamenco songs. And I found myself reflecting on this short passage of words, and I'd like to share with you what my reflections were. Oh, it's a powerful flamenco song. I mean, it's gut-wrenching. And when they sing it in the canto hondo, that is the deep song, well, you hear the flamenco singer just rip the words of this song right out of his guts. And it's very moving just to hear the sound of it, even if you don't know the words. And of course, it sounds convincing, just like if somebody was run over by a truck and they lay there in the road screaming and groaning, you would have to say that they sounded pretty convincing in making an expression of their pain, wouldn't you? But even though this flamenco song, the words of this flamenco song sound convincing, upon examination, they're really not very convincing at all. In the first place, what is the world? Well, the song says, if you want to know what the world is, and you think you're a big shot in the world, then you must go to the cemetery. And there you will see what the world is. It's a handful of dirt. Well, okay, but let me ask you this. Why doesn't the song say, you should just go to the beach, or you should just go over there to the mountainside and crouch down and pick up a handful of dirt? That's what the world is, a handful of dirt from the side of the mountain, or a handful of sand from the beach. Why doesn't it say that? Well, obviously it doesn't say that because the point of the song, the point the song is making, is that no matter how great you think you are, you will die and you will end up a handful of dirt in the cemetery, right? But upon examination, that doesn't hold up either, because the ashes of a human being, suppose that you were burned or cremated, and your ashes lay there in the cemetery, and someone comes and picks up a handful of your ashes, well, your human ashes are not dirt, are they? So what is this about the world being a handful of dirt? Well, you find in this flamenco song a message which obviously clearly is intended to attack, the grandiosity of the human ego, and does a very good job of it in that respect. But in cosmological terms, it doesn't hang together at all. In the first place, the difference between going to the cemetery to pick up a handful of dirt and know what the world is, and going to the beach or the mountainside or the plowed field, is that the cemetery is a place created already by human beings. The cemetery is part of a story. The cemetery is there because human beings have a story, and the story compels them to create places which are called cemeteries, where they bury the dead. But if you just go to the beach or to the plowed field, well, no, the plowed field is also a story. Let's just say you go to the unplowed field. The unplowed field, the open hillside where you can dig your hands into the dirt, and the beach are all without human story. But they are not entirely without story. Because just as the cemetery is there because of a human story, the sand on the beach is there because of a superhuman story. And that is the story of life describing itself. Now, another comment that I might make, just spinning off from this flamenco song, is this comment about the world is just a handful of dirt. Well, the world is not just a handful of dirt. The world consists of countless handfuls of dirt composed into a planet. So the world is a planet, and the planet is not just a handful of dirt. And the dirt is not inert. Because from that dirt, even the graveyard dirt, grass grows and plants grow. And those plants feed animals. And animals grow out of the same habitat as the plants, and everything grows out of the earth. And even though animals like the human animal walk around on two legs, mobile, the human animal grows out of the earth just as much as a cabbage or a zucchini or a sequoia tree. And so the flamenco song is a bitter indictment of human grandiosity, and it works very well as such. But upon scrutiny, it doesn't really touch the mystery of life, and it doesn't say anything about why humans would be there in the first place, so that they have the opportunity to glorify themselves into something that they're not. You see? The fallen goddess scenario is the story, uniquely, of all myths on the planet that brings to human attention the very great fact that the planet is an animal, and it is alive. We call this animism, but as I said, not in his image. Animism is not the belief that nature is alive and animated. It is the direct, vivid, and irrefutable, undeniable perception that it is so. That is animism. Animism as a belief means nothing. If you just hold animist beliefs, you are not an animist. An animist is someone who sees and knows the living properties of nature and who responds to those properties and who allows himself or herself to be impacted by those properties. Because when you do witness directly the living and animated properties of the natural world and the planet, it's impressive. Oh yeah. In fact, it is so impressive that it's kind of overwhelming. And I have on many occasions witnessed people who freaked out because they thought that there was some unnameable force coming to eat them alive. And they were right. The planet eventually will eat you. It will consume you. The planet that produced you, she will eventually consume you. The mother that produced you, she will eventually take you back into her womb and create something else out of the constituent materials that you once were. But even before that happens, that event, so-called death, which is just a certain kind of change, even before that event happens, she is constantly in front of you in the position of a very, very massive, very hungry mother lion. Now, as long as you're alive and she likes you, she just lick you. But the very presence of the living power of the planetary animal mother engenders the sensation that you are going to be eaten alive. And people who cannot handle that sensation run away from the experience. I call that biophobia. They're actually afraid of life. And that is an illness. I'll get to that when I do my little commentary on the emotional plague. Biophobia is a big problem on this planet. The psychopaths and those who are destroying life are actually afraid of life. They are trapped in a toxic syndrome of biophobia. But ordinary people are also afraid of life too. How do you think so many people, so many human animals on this planet could flock to cities and lock themselves up in cages and never see even the slightest trace of the natural world? Some people never see it for the entirety of their lives. They just see concrete and glass and steel and pollution. and machines, how do you think it would be possible for massive millions upon millions of human beings to exhibit that behavior if they were not afraid of direct contact with life? Now, I'll tell you, I know from personal experience, when you take people out on a shamanic journey, this is the first thing that you see. You know, the fear. The fear when the earth starts to come alive. The fear, the first moment that you see that ripple on her skin. You see the bark of the trees start to ripple like the skin of a snake. You see the clouds start to roil. You realize the clouds are roiling, boiling in some mysterious manner. And you realize the earth is breathing. You realize that you are in the presence of a planetary animal. And the very power of her presence generates a tremendous impact to which you are invited to surrender. And if you don't, then you're not going to have that experience. You're not going to have intimacy with the Aeon Sophia if you cannot surrender to her in total, selfless bliss and gratitude, often accompanied by massive sobbing. This is how you stand in the presence of the planetary animal mother, and it's the same for everybody. And that event, which occurs in an altered state, and for which we require the aid of the genial species, because the ego cannot get out of its own game. Okay? That event, well, let me tell you, is the decisive moment that recurs again and again in human history. If it is allowed to happen, it's practically not allowed to happen anymore. But if you go back a few thousand years before the rise of Christianity, if you go back to a time when animism prevailed on this planet, if you go back to a time before theocracy and the imposition of nature-hating and woman-hating religions like Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, well, then you'll find that human animals were more receptive to that experience, although they still had to be guided to it, and they still had to be steadied. Remember, the role of the Nawal is to steady the approach to the unknown and to provide syntax for the impouring of the supernatural. And so that event of standing in the presence of the overpowering and overwhelming beauty of life itself, of the planet, of the living planet, is a recurrent event. It must be a recurrent event, and it must recur over and over again for certain members of the human species in order for the human species to survive as such. Why have we degenerated at this point down into Kali Yuga? Well, there are a number of reasons. It's a complex situation, needless to say. Sexuality and the loss of genuine erotic sexual innocence and freedom to experiment sexually has been a huge contributing factor, psychosocially speaking. Psychosocially, is that a word? But really, the decisive factor has been the decrease in that encounter over many centuries. How many people on the earth today, let me ask you right now, honestly, how many people do you think living on this earth today have had that encounter? Damn few. Okay? And many of them who have had it, unfortunately, by using psychoactive substances or even by using chemical substances such as mescaline and LSD, have not been able to stay with it, you see. They have not been able to be steady with that experience and hold it steady. Those who can have that experience and hold it steady, hold this entire planet steady. on course with the aeons of fire. And that's the way it is, and it's the only way it can ever be. Now, for those who cannot have this experience, and it is problematical, as you know, the conditions for telepathic shamanism are problematical. For me, they are. I guarantee you. But for those who never get around to have that experience, there is something equivalent. There is something that can bring them into the same intimacy with her and eventually can birth them in the depths of their souls into her presence. And that is her story. That is the fallen goddess scenario. Now, the screenplay that I'm working on begins, well, let me see. It begins in this way. Let me see if I can find it. That's another thing. Hold on. It begins with some images and a voiceover. And the opening image is a microscopic view of living cells. And the voiceover says, "Life, a perpetual wonder, a miracle of diversity and change, a mystery unto itself. It happens everywhere, beginning on the microscopic scale. Like an artist whose talent generates many forms and styles, life invents prodigiously. Doing so, it fashions countless species, including the one that calls itself Homo sapiens, the human creature." And here you see on the screen formation of the human fetus, the organs, the hands, the eyes. Close up on the eyes of an unborn fetus. Voiceover. In some miraculous way, life creates its own audience, those who witness it, because it gives them the equipment to witness what it does. The eyes and ears, the faculties of touch, smell, taste, and other senses. As if it were following a rule. Thus shall I, life, behold myself in creatures of my own making. So from there the montage proceeds to show various species, flamingos, caribou, dolphins, butterflies, snakes, say a close-up on a murmuration of starlings or other birds flying in a mass in the sky the way they do. And the narration then fades, then the montage fades to a panoramic view of the stars wheeling around the earth. And the narration continues. All creatures participate in the dance of life, but in particular there is one that excels in observing the manifold designs of life. There is a unique witness to life. Among the millions of species produced by life, this one creature finds exquisite patterns in the fluid ordering of the natural world. Then the montage fades into the Fibonacci series illustrated in the heads of sunflower plants, animal horns, seashells, and so forth, and say cutting or fading to children on the beach observing seashells and examples of the Fibonacci pattern, the golden sections in nature, the expressions of the golden section in nature. Now this is only, get this, the second or third minute of the opening of the film, and now the voiceover goes to this. Listen closely. One creature gifted with powers to observe, record, measure, compare, and describe excels in the investigation of nature's bounteous and beauteous patterns. Yet, paradoxically, that same creature has the capacity to disrupt and destroy those life-sustaining patterns to an extent unmatched by any other inhabitant of the earth. And in doing so, it threatens the web of life itself. It threatens the very setting where life has placed it, its own habitat. It threatens its own role as the unique witness to life. Bear in mind that the entire 82-minute, I think it is, 84-minute screenplay does not consist of a scientific exposition of the fallen goddess scenario. It does not consist of this kind of voiceover with corresponding imagery and montage through the entire film. No. In fact, a large section, the greater part of the film, is dedicated to the telling of the story, but there is a setup to the telling of the story. So the documentary consists of exposition and narration. And the purpose of the exposition is to set up the story. So this is how it begins, but it goes to the narration of the sacred myth quite rapidly. So there's a little glimpse of the screenplay based on the story of life describing itself. And I'd like to leave you with this consideration as I close this news flash. The generative syntax of this screenplay is a telestic or initiatory tool. And so by writing the screenplay along with you who are insiders in her correction, I hand you that tool. And I invite you to use it with me. For the world at large who are not privy or intimate with her connection, the tool operates on their minds, but they themselves do not use this tool. Now, the operative syntax that sets this screenplay in motion is extremely powerful in its concision and in its lucidity. Here is that syntax. I give it to you in two parts. There is a unique witness to life. Part 1. And the witness comes to describe life. Part 2. There is a unique witness to life, and it is that witness who comes to describe life. And so through that witness, life describes itself. And the story of life describing itself can only be one story, if it is accurate, and if it is comprehensive and inclusive. There are many stories that can describe life. Ask Richard Dawkins, ask an atheistic scientist who thinks that the earth is inert, who thinks that matter is inert, that that dirt is not alive, that the planet is not alive, like a mouse is alive or an elephant is alive. Ask them. Ask Richard Dawkins or some other scientific jackass who's never had a moment of animism in his life. And he will give you a story about life. The Christians will give you a story about life and how it came to be. And so will the Jews, and so will the Hindus, And so will the Muslims. And the Muslims will give you a story about nothing because they are so corrupted mentally that they can't even hold a plot. But you get my point. Well, there are many stories about life, but there can only be one story of life describing itself that actually works. Because the story of life describing itself is one that you must experience and participate in. You cannot be just a spectator. You just can't be in the audience. You have to be a unique witness to life and realize that that is your story, and it's the only one that counts, because it's the only one that begins with the living presence of the earth, which is the source of life within our dimension, within the dimension of the human animal. So that is the powerful syntax with which this film begins. And I offer you the lovely little tag phrase the story of life describing itself, to remind you of it. There have been many witnesses to life through the ages, and they have recorded what they witnessed. For instance, look at Aristotle. Go read Aristotle's physics. Go read his observations of nature. But there were specialists in observing life who knew that by that very act of observation, by the very fact that they were able to observe it, that they were invested with a sacred responsibility to describe what they observed in terms of its origin, not in terms of a human frame imposed upon the story, but in terms of the origin of the story itself. And those were the telestai of the sacred pagan mysteries. The fallen goddess scenario is the birthright of the entire human race. But it is the responsibility of a tiny, tiny faction of the human race, and always has been. And I invite you to undertake with me that responsibility, which is unlike any other. And I invite you to be with me benefactors to humanity in the abundance of this terma.